Welcome, divas and dudes, to Powerhouse Bakery. It's so good to be back and see you all. It was great to have a little break. I hiked up in Santa Fe and it rained almost the whole time, which was wonderful. I only wish I could have brought it back to Texas with me. Everything looked so dry and forlorn. And I got to do a house trade. I didn't trade my house, but the friends that we were with, in this really cool situation where you rack up points by sharing your home, and then you get to go to somebody else's home. So we stayed in this gorgeous place. So I was in heaven because she had the most amazing kitchen. And so I was thinking about you guys all the time. The first time ever I actually used a faucet that fills a pasta pan. You see those on TV? I got to use one. But they forgot an important detail. You fill it up there, because you're not strong enough to bring it over, right? But you still have to bring it back when you're done. They had to figure out a way to empty it too. But it was so fun, and she also had a garden, a fully developed garden. She had chickens and bees. So I was just, in heaven. So I got to gather fresh arugula and basil and tomatoes, all kinds of chard, and make greens. And the couple that we were with were, almost vegan. So we had a blast. And so it really just got me invigorated to share more ideas and to really help us on our journey of how to not only eat more from the earth, but celebrate time close to the earth. And, if you are thinking about your exercise program, and as we're getting into nice cool weather, I just want to really emphasize how great it is just to be outside. Don't feel like it has to be a serious event. I mean, the hiking was just gorgeous, but just being outside and breathing fresh air. And when you get into the routine of walking outside without a lot of commitment, it makes it so much easier to add a little more on or not. And then the commitment there is all based on how good it makes you feel rather than the have-tos. And I'm such an advocate of that. When we look at the anti-cancer way of life, we sure don't want there to be an extra stress about the have-tos. We want it to be a time of rejuvenation, both of our physical body, but also our spirit and our senses. And so as we're drifting into the fall weather, I hope and pray for the cool temperatures to last a little beyond 10 a.m., right, in Texas. But it's been really great to just be able to spend a little time outside. So I hope all of you get to do the same thing. We're launching into a fun new section. I got some good feedback from you all of just, what should we talk about and what do we want to learn more about? Brenda did a great job last week. I watched her video and she did an awesome job of sharing some gadgets. And so the more we get to really look at how to make this experience in the kitchen fun, but also, not necessarily making it more cumbersome. We want to make sure that it's easy to prepare food and not have it overly cumbersome. Sometimes gadgets make it tough because, you have to find it, you have to put it together, then you have to wash it and put it away. And so I've never been a big fan of gadgets for that reason. I'm kind of the old school gal, and I hate to spend a lot of money on things that are just going to stay in my shelves. But over the last few years doing these videos, I have come up with some really fun ones. Yeah, we have to turn off the thing. Sorry, Mary. Thank you. That little doorbell. So we have come across some that I think are worthwhile. But what I wanted to do in the next few weeks is really delve into how to build our kitchen so that it's of minimalist as far as gadgets, but also how do we pick and then prepare and care for some of the ones that I think are the most important. So as we go through the next weeks, I still want to hear from you. Give me some suggestions of areas where you feel like, okay, what about this? Or how about that? Or how do we work with this issue? I did shop in Santa Fe. If you've ever shopped in Santa Fe, it's intoxicating, right? But they had the most beautiful farmers market. And this one in particular had beautiful, fresh produce, but they also had a few little gadgets. So I did buy one. I'm going to keep it a secret until I bring it out. But it's got no moving parts. and it's so handy. So I can't wait to show you that one. But today what I want to do is go over one that I think is probably the most critical, and that is the skillet. And you know, there's so many different skillets out there, and in this beautiful kitchen that I was working in, sure enough, she had all kinds. But I really wanted to go back to my old favorite, which is the favorite cast iron. And so what I want to do is kind of share with you how to prepare them. And every time I do a class with you guys, I learn too. So just know that I love getting to learn right beside you. So we're going to learn some of the things to do to prepare your cast iron. We're going to learn about seasoning the surface, the cooking surface. And then we're going to put away some of the rules that really aren't so critical, so that we can learn how to develop one. My mom had a cast iron skillet that she worked with from, gosh, the whole time I was growing up, and she got it from her mom, and I wish I could lay my hands on it and take a look at it. Because one of the things that we're going to talk about is how important it is to, A, use the skillet a lot, and then think of when you're developing the surface, what we're really trying to do is develop a polymer, or this really strong coating on the surface of the metal. And so we do that with a fat. So when we think of the surface, you know, we would sometimes put out lots of money for a special skillet. And we might, you know, think, okay, it's a Christmas gift and I'm going to go all out and I'm going to spend a lot of money on a skillet. And the first thing that comes to mind is, well, what's the surface, right? We want it to be non-stick. And then there's some fears around non-stick. So when we think of the cast iron, what we're going to be developing on this polymer is a very important surface, but it's really integral now to the metal, rather than something that the manufacturer puts on and promises it'll never scratch when we know it really will, or even using like a disposable pan. Well, it's beautiful now and I'm just going to use it for a few weeks and throw it away. Because we know that's not good for our landfills, and it certainly ultimately is not going to be good for your cooking process, because we know that if a surface is going to flake off into your food, well, now we're worried about all those carcinogens, and of course, you know, if it's not going to taste good. But the carcinogens are something that we're really aware of, right? We know that Teflon's got a lot of issues, and so when we're ready to put out a lot of money for a skillet, we're sort of thinking, okay, I'm going to pay a lot of money because I'm going to get the best. But what I found in this lady's beautiful kitchen is that when no expenses are held back, she still did not have good skillets because they were scratched. She didn't have a beautiful cast iron, because ultimately these are very inexpensive. A cast iron skillet is heavy, so granted, you got to have a little muscle to wield it around, or at least use two hands. But they're not expensive. But what it takes is a little know-how in how to prepare it so that you can get the effect you want. So when we're looking for a skillet, we want it to be non-stick. Of course, we want it to be easy to manage. And so we kind of have to realign our thinking here. So if we buy a super expensive skillet, it might come with some instructions, and it'll say, you know, never use an abrasive tool, or never use metal on metal. And our thinking is that if we use the right tool, it'll be easy to manage. Well, that now becomes difficult, because you have to make sure you don't get any metal next to the metal, and, you know, no, honey, don't use that one, you just ruined my good skillet, right? With a cast iron, it is so strong when you season it correctly that now you can use whatever gadget, whatever scraper, because really nonstick isn't actual. We want to have it low stick. Nothing is ever nonstick. Maybe the first time you use it, and then eventually it doesn't hold that quality anymore, except for a cast iron skillet, because every time you use it, you're investing in that surface. And so the oils that we use are going to help to build that composite, and it becomes the surface that keeps the watery stuff, aka food, from adhering that chemical reaction that adheres your egg to the skillet and it doesn't make it to your plate because it's now all on the skillet, is that chemical reaction that we're trying to avoid. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about that cast iron. And I think I even have one more that I put over there. Yes, if you want to hand me, Evelyn, if you move my iPad off and just hand me that big skillet, that's really the one that I brought from home that I wanted to share with you, because this one I've been working on for several years. Thank you, ma'am. I know, and it's not light. I'm used to it. Yeah, okay, good. So this is pretty smooth, but it's not perfect. I'm gonna, like I said, I learn every time I do this, but it's pretty close. When we are developing the surface of the cast iron, it takes time, it takes temperature, and it takes the right oil. So let's write that down. So when you're developing your seasoning for your cast iron, it takes time, good amount of temperature, and the right kind of surfactant. Now, if you check YouTube and the internet, you're going to see lots of different types of oils recommended. So I want to help you see why olive oil is the best. Also, we can't do it all at once. So I've been preparing another skillet for my son to give him as a gift for his kitchen. And I really wanted to have it ready for his first anniversary, but I didn't do it. I didn't use it enough. And so it's going to be ready for his next anniversary. I didn't want to give them to him as a wedding gift because I didn't feel like they had enough space, because you only really need one. But of course, when you're getting wedding gifts and you want lots of things, you feel like, well, I need a pan set. It's going to take them a little time to realize you don't need a pan set. You need one good one of these and maybe a little bit smaller one and you're good, right? So anyway, it takes time to create it. And it's going to take some pretty hot temperatures. So this is something that I learned. Through the years when I watched my mom season her cast iron, she would put some oil on it and put it in a low temperature oven and let it sit there and kind of cook on slow. What I'm learning now is that composite really needs high temperature. So it needs a high temperature in order to really create that bond with the oil and the surface of the metal. And that's when we come to the oil. So if you go on the internet and you look up ways to season a skillet, sometimes it'll say lard. Sometimes it'll say any oil is fine. Sometimes it'll say, well, since you are a foodie and you are looking for a way to season your all-important skillet, you must want to spend a lot of money. So yeah, let's use some flax oil. Has anybody seen that? No, good. I've seen a few of them. Yeah, get the really nice, expensive flax oil. No, we don't need this one. Now, for starters, the whole rationale around using lard, let me give you a little picture, is the nature of the oil. So when we're looking at creating this composite on the skillet, what we're really looking at is how the bonds of the oil are reacting to the surface. So we want to break off these little bonds of the oil and we want to connect it to the other oils and also connect it to the metal. This is what causes that strong surfactant, and that's what keeps your skillet from getting rusty or getting food stuck. So you got to do a lot of these layers. Now the idea around lard is, well, it has a lot of saturation. It's saturated with these double bonds, therefore it must be the better oil to use. Kind of true, but have you ever heard me encourage you to use lard? No. So while it might be okay, let's say you're not going to use lard because it never was in your kitchen, right? You're using a better oil, and so now we say, okay, well, what's the best liquid oil? You've probably heard me talk about the different oils, the ones that have the PUFAs and the MUFAs and the saturated ones. The MUFAs are the monounsaturated fatty acids, and the PUFAs are the polyunsaturated fatty acids, and then we have the saturated fats, like butter and lard. Butter is kind of the same one here. And just as an aside, I don't mind you using butter. It's a great flavor. It's got all kinds of linolenic acid, lots of good things about real organic butter. But it's not so good for seasoning the skillet because it also has a lot of other ingredients in it, right? So now it's not just a pure oil. If you've ever seen ghee, you can tell that butter is very different than just the oils that come from the butter. So that's really why butter would not even be in this category. But if we go back to this idea, the monounsaturates and the polyunsaturates really mean that if there's a lot of those bonds that aren't double, if a lot of them are just single, like the oils we find being healthy, there isn't going to be as many of these bonds to break away and connect to the metal, right? Because we need a double bond or two. So that's why like canola oil is also pretty good because it's a monounsaturated. Poly means a lot of those bonds are unsaturated. We want there to be some of these double bonds. So enough of chemistry, but I thought that was so interesting. And the takeaway is we don't use lard and we don't need to season our skillet with butter, but we can certainly put butter on a little toast, right? But we really want to use the best quality oil to season our skillet. So that's why I came up with olive oil. Olive oil is best. Now, one thing I also want to do is back up and talk about what it means to be seasoned. Does it mean we want lots of salt and pepper and oregano and paprika on our skillet? Definitely not. You guys are so smart. No, we don't want it to have flavor. Now, if you use your seasoned cast iron skillet for fish, it's going to accidentally get some flavor. Now, if you have a really good, solid, multiple layers of that surfactant or the composite, maybe you won't get a flavor of fish on there, but I recommend one for fish, one for everything else. Because, yeah, some of that flavor is going to show up by accident. But I'm also going to do a little cooking with you today, and I want to show you how to make sure that we use the skillet a lot. And then when you do add real seasonings, so oregano and thyme and salt and pepper and whatever else, you put it on the food and you don't put it directly on the skillet. So the fish we can't help. It's going to be on the skillet, so that's why you use a separate one. Okay, so olive oil is definitely best when we're creating that surfactant. And again, that's because it has some of these double bonds that now are going to break off, and it's going to connect to the metal and make a really strong layered effect of that protection. And we can't rush it. We've got to do it a lot of times. And that's another really important technique. So I'm going to show you here when I put on some oil. So this is mine that I've been working on for probably a few years. And you can see that there's really nothing stuck on here. It's fairly smooth. There isn't any rust. Versus the one that's here at Powerhouse Bakery, if I don't really watch everybody, they put it in the water. You see that little bit of rust? Bad. So I'm going to show you how we fix that. But when we're working with a skillet that's in pretty good shape, if I were to burn something, I could scrape it, I could clean it, I could use some steel wool, because I'm not trying to avoid getting the little particles off, because there really shouldn't be particles there. Instead, it should be a very thin layer of olive oil that with heat changes those bonds, connects to the metal, and makes a composite that never comes off. Okay, so a very small amount of oil. So I brought out my very stingy olive oil dispenser, and I'm using a clean towel, and I'm just rubbing it on. Now, if you feel like there might be too much oil on there, there is too much oil on there. It should be the tiniest bit. You'll see on YouTube videos that sometimes it'll say, well, you can put it in the oven and do your seasoning, and you could turn it upside down and make sure you put another pan underneath it because all this oil is going to drip off. That is wrong, 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 wrong. Too much. If you do that, you're going to see little beads of brown burnt on oil, and that's what we do not want. That is not creating the composite that we need to make this beautiful layer of the composite that ultimately makes the metal pan stronger. Okay, so that's beautiful, just like that. So now I'm going to show you in a minute here. I'm going to get over to my cooking area, but let's go back to this one. So first I'd have to get the rust off. So I'd take a piece of steel wool and I'd scrub that a little bit. It actually just wipes off. So again, I'm using my damp towel now and I'm wiping. You can see that little layer of rust. Now we've been using these two skillets for many years at Powerhouse Bakery, and they're in pretty good shape, despite the fact that if I'm not really watching, my team will do all the right things they think, and that is scrub it with soap and water and let it soak in the sanitizer. And exactly, my blood is curdling because it's like, no, it does not need to go in the sanitizer, and it sure doesn't need to soak, right? Cast iron, if you're building the right seasoning, you should never need to let it soak. Never soak in water. Because what happens is there'll always be little holes in that surfactant that we're creating. Because again, it takes time. So if you're soaking it in water, these layers that you're building with your olive oil and your heat will get little holes, and the water will seep through and cause rust. And that's, of course, not what we want. Another thing that happens if you're using an oil that has byproducts in it, so butter or even too much oil, and it bakes on and it gets cracks, these little things flake off. Have you ever seen that when you're trying to season a skillet? I've had people call me, what do I do? My skillet has all this black stuff coming off. What I tell them is that a couple things have happened. One, you have seeped through, so you haven't built time, temperature, and the right oil in a very thin coating, so it's seeped through and it's causing it to flake off. So sadly, you kind of have to start over. Not going to take a long time, but it is going to mean starting from scratch. So then you get your steel wool, you scrub it down to the metal, and you just start putting your thin layer of oil on it again, gradually, and you can put it into your oven for about 30 minutes, for probably about 375, so pretty hot. So when you have to start over, or even, if you have a brand new skillet, scrub it down, make sure it's nice and clean. Sometimes the skillets will even come pre-seasoned. A Lodge is the brand, I believe, LOD, that you can buy from H-E-B. It's like $13 for a heavy-duty series skillet, and it doesn't have anything on it. But I still say go ahead and scrub it with some hot soapy water and get it nice and clean, because you want to be the one that decides what's going into your layers of that surfactant. So myth number one is that you should never use soap. You can use soap. Oops, let me dry it a little bit. You can use soap as long as you've already got a good layer on it. So soap, and of course, soak. So soap use, yes. Soaking, no. We don't need it to sit in water, but we can use a mild soap and water to clean it. So when I'm watching my team and they're using our soap, we have a very mild soap. I think the myth probably came to never use soap on your skillet. My mom said that back when there was really strong soaps. Maybe it had lye in it, or they had other kind of really harsh detergents. Because a mild soap like we normally get in a home kitchen is absolutely fine to wash it off. So you can use soap. You never want to soak it. And scraping is also just fine. Of course, when you have good cooking technique, you shouldn't have to scrape too much. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit today too, and how to make sure that your product doesn't create a chemical reaction and stick to your skillet. So any kind of skillet works for that same idea. So here I brought one which is from my home. So it's been used a ton. And this is just another really heavy metal. But look how pretty. And I cook eggs on this all the time because it's been seasoned. Now, if you could see this brand new, it would not have this little dull kind of yellow look to it. I've been adding olive oil over the years, and it comes out really nice. One thing I hadn't done was do the underneath. So I probably could have. I could probably scrub all this. Years ago when I used to run a kitchen in California, I had this awesome dude that was really strong, and he cleaned the bottoms of all our skillets, and I just wanted to kiss his toes. I mean, they were beautiful. I don't have that now, so they're not as pretty. But if I had it brand new, you'd see that it's much brighter metal, and then that little tinge. Anytime you do the small amount of olive oil over the servings or the times that you use the skillet, it's going to change the color a little bit, and that's a-okay. But if you have to scrape something, then you just do the best you can to get the surface clean again, put some olive oil on it, and put it right back in the oven. So when we're doing the seasoning in the oven, whether it's the first time you do it or the 31st time you do it, you want to do a very thin coating, and you want to preheat the oven. Don't put a pan underneath it because you shouldn't need that, right? It's just a tiny, tiny amount of olive oil. So you do 350, or you could even go higher. I mean, we'll say 350 to 400 degree oven in the middle rack. Cooking side up. So again, don't listen to some of these YouTubers that say turn it upside down. There's no need for that. With your very thin coating. Let it sit in there for about 20 minutes. Maybe 30, but not much more. It'll smoke a little bit. Today I'm going to do it on my cooktop. And again, you can do it in the oven or the cooktop. The nice thing about the oven is it gets it all over the surface. And that's something that I really didn't do as well in my skillets, because most of my seasoning is on the cooking surface. It's not up on the edges. So not a big deal, because I don't do a lot of things that fill up the skillet that much. The things that I do cook that are more soupy, that have a larger volume, are going to have a bit more moisture. So my ratatouille, any kind of stew, it's not going to really stick on the edges. But it does make it look really pretty if you get your seasoning all around both the bottom and the sides and even the handle. But again, I don't typically do that. Now on these ones that have the grating, so if you've ever had our turkey burgers, our beet burgers, and our bean burgers, I love to put a little color on them. So we get this nice and hot, and we touch it, and then we finish off the cooking in the oven. Now what's really nice is, if I just do 4, now here I can do 8 at a time, I just bring the skillet from the cooktop right into the oven and let them finish. When we used to do even more, the trick was you had to get it off and put it onto another baking pan to get it into the oven. So you didn't want anything to stick, because now your beautiful grill marks are going to get pulled off. So having a smooth surface was really important. So I had to really work with my team to not spray the bejeebers out of the nonstick spray, because that has all kinds of chemicals in it. I didn't want them to do that. Instead, it's all about technique. So you heat up the skillet. It's got a good amount of seasoning on it. Might not be perfect, but it's a good start. Get it nice and hot. So again, mise en place is super important, because then you put your burgers on high heat. You turn the heat down just a little bit, let it do its beautiful magic with that blackening just in a little bit. And then we move the whole skillet into the oven after about 3 or 4 minutes. Do you remember a couple weeks ago we talked about that browning reaction that I said it's not very good? The acrylamide? Right? And I said, yeah, even toast has it. Well, we're talking about the same thing. So we don't want very much of that blackening. So again, when I talked about it last time, I really emphasized that a little bit, is going to have not only some good flavor component, but it also makes the food beautiful. So does that mean we can never have a little bit of grill here and there? And that answer would be no. But we don't want it to be done on a skillet that has a lot of other chemicals. I'd much rather it be cast iron or some other kind of really clean metal. and the surfactant that I've built with olive oil. So in general, we want to start with a clean skillet. If you accidentally used your good skillet for fish, it's not the end of the world. You can scrub it down with some hot soapy water. And even if you felt like you needed to, use some steel wool and take down one of the layers and then build it back up. So the skillet that my mom has, she's been cooking a lot of things on it. We didn't really cook salmon. We usually did that one on a grill or other fish. But she used to do spaghetti squash and meat sauce, all kinds of neat things in the skillet. And it should not carry on flavors from those previous meals. It should be whatever seasoning you want to add to it. Okay? So in general, we want to have the surfactant built over time. So don't rush it. After every use, you want to quickly wipe it down. So after use, you can use hot water. Even when the skillet is still hot is really the best time to get the rest of the food contents out. So again, it's kind of heavy, but bring it over, get a little bit of water, put it back on the cooktop, let it bubble away, whatever's there, and then quickly empty it, wipe it down with a paper towel, and you could do a little bit of oil and put it away, but it's even better to put a little bit of oil and put it back on the stove for 8 to 10 minutes. That would be consistently building that layer. And again, if you see any of the black or brown little bubbles, you know that you probably used too much oil and not enough heat. Okay, so after use, wipe down, hot water. A little bit of soap is okay if you need it. And then reapply small layer of oil and back in the oven. Back to the heat. Okay, so surfactant over time. After each use, nice and clean, reapply the oil and back to the heat. Maybe once a month you could put the whole thing into the oven and do the bottom and the sides and the edges. Dina, did you have a question?
Would you recommend using like red sauces?
Red sauces, yes, absolutely. The question Dina had was, would you recommend using red sauces? And like I mentioned, my mom, she was famous for her spaghetti meat sauce, her spaghetti sauce. So the acidity is probably what you're thinking. Do you not use acid products in the skillet? And I would say, absolutely you do. The trick is to make sure you do the same process, adding the surfactant over time. After every use, wipe it down, and making sure that you don't let it soak in water, because that breaks down your layers of that, that important barrier. If you do see any showing of rust, which you saw it on this one, I just wiped it and it came right off. There's so many layers of metal in here. There's lots of room for accidents. And so you just have to wipe it down, put the oil on, put it back in the oven. And what's cool is, you know how I mentioned we do our burgers, we get it nice and hot. Of course, before we let it get hot, we put some oil on there. We put the burgers on, let them color up. We put it in the oven. Guess what it's doing right then? It's seasoning the rest of the skillet. Granted, we've got our 4 burgers there, but it's still getting some good interaction with the oil that we put on the skillet and the heat that's in the oven while I'm finishing off those burgers. So think of it that way. When I finally got 2 of them, my team didn't have to, try to peel them off, and because every time you do that, you're kind of irritating the surface and making it harder for the next batch of that same day. You follow me? Okay? So let's do a little cooking. I'm going to heat up my little cooktop here. And what I love about this is we can use all kinds of different metals with this cooktop, as long as they have metal in them. So I know for sure. I'm going to go ahead and use my favorite one. This one works too, but I really want you to see how a little bit of smoking is okay when I apply the heat. Okay, so I'm starting it at a +5. I'm going to let that heat up. And I just put a little bit of oil on there already. You know, when we were talking about it, I'm going to do a tiny bit more. Wipe it down. Again, this is my clean rag. And I'm going to go ahead and put it on the edges too. Once it starts getting hot, it's probably going to start to smoke a little bit, and that's okay. That just means that the temperature is enough to cause that chemical reaction to begin. Okay, so while I'm letting that heat up, I'm going to slice some onion. Anytime you're doing a saute, you are building that surfactant. So even if you don't go through all the process, just know that you've got cooking time that really is the most valuable. So I'm sauteing onion and garlic today, which are something that we, hopefully we do all the time. Those are our basic flavors. And if I'm doing this for a recipe, I'm going to first get the skillet hot. I'm going to do my mise en place, make sure I've got all my seasonings ready and my veggies that I want to cook, and then put them all in together. Don't gradually put them in the skillet, or don't put them in the skillet while the skillet's heating up. That's a mistake that new chefs often make, and it intensifies the chemical reaction that congeals or connects the food moisture to the skillet, aka sticking badly. So whenever we're doing scrambled eggs and I can convince my team to do what I'm telling them to do, and that is to let the skillet get really hot, and then put the small amount of oil in, and then put your eggs in, and then turn the heat down a bit, I promise you will never have a sticking egg. And so I always have to check the skillet after they do their eggs to see if they listen to me. And I'll know that they have if it's not full of egg. Yes. So now I've got some beautiful onion prepped, and I'm going to do a little bit of garlic. So even when I was visiting this beautiful home, I'm always perusing to see what kind of spices and what kinds of things did she have in her kitchen. She had a drawer, so like a silverware drawer, open it up, and it's loaded with spices laying down. Does anybody do that? Yeah? I thought it was brilliant. Because so often, what do we do with spices? We put them in a cabinet where we look, and especially for me, I can't find anything. So I thought it was kind of cool. She had them all in a drawer. So Evelyn, you do that too. I grew up in a farmhouse, and I still love this design. In this little old farmhouse, there was a very shallow cabinet that went from probably 5 feet down to almost the floor. And you open it up, and it's kind of like a drawer, but it's a very shallow cabinet. So you open it up, and it's just wide enough for all the spices. Has anybody seen that? It's fantastic. And of course, when I had my kitchen built, I didn't think of that. I wish I had. Okay, so here's my garlic. Now, when we're cooking two different veggies, we want to think of which one do we want to have connect to the heat first, and what's the goal? Do we want to brown it, or do we want to allow the veggies to sweat, meaning that it's cooking very gradually and allowing some of the natural oils and, of course, moisture to come out of the vegetable? Sometimes the end result is that the skillet's too hot and it's now cooked it too much or browned it too much. And so I always say we want to err on the conservative side when you're doing garlic, because we don't really want it to get too brown. Now you might say, well, how do you do that if you've got your skillet on high? And so the trick is to have your hand ready to lower the heat as soon as you put your items in. We want the surfactant to be ready to have a sizzling effect. So right away, you put the product into the hot skillet, and it doesn't have time to sink in and congeal. The surfactant is working right away to keep the product from sinking into the surface of the metal. So I'm going to start with the higher liquid veggie first, which is the onion. Got the sizzle. So I'm going to let them spread just a little bit. And, I'm using metal. I mean, I'm using plastic or rubber, and really my favorite is wooden spoons. Anybody use wooden? Love wooden cutting boards as well. In some kitchens, they say that that's not good, that it harbors bacteria. Have you heard that before? Absolutely not true. The good thing about wood is that while it does have a porous quality, the bacteria is never able to exit. It goes in, but it stays there and it eventually dies because it cannot exit. So it's a wonderful quality of wood that it dries well, it feels good, it doesn't scratch surfaces. But, you know, there are certainly going to be occasions where metal is not a bad thing. You want to be able to have good accuracy and good strength. Good to see you, Miss Laura. So it's one of those things where you decide where you want your utensil strength to be. I like that this one's pliable, so it helps me to get under things and flip over. You know, whenever I'm working at a stove, I always want to have a couple different ones because it helps me decide what tool do I need for a given situation. So it's starting to smell good. Nothing better than cooking onions, right? Except maybe cooking garlic. Here it comes. I'm going to use the back end of my knife to do the scraping. If you have a beautiful sharp knife, you never want to scrape with the edge of the knife. So I'm going to use the back edge, bring it up, I'm going to put it right on top of the onion because I want to let them get gently cooked because it's really important to me that garlic doesn't brown. So it's a kind of a sweet spot of a little cooking because of course we want to get all those aromatics, but we don't want it to get pungent. And so there's that little bit of a trick there. Now, I'm going to tilt it so you can see that tiny bit of oil that I put on when I was creating the surfactant isn't quite enough for the cooking technique that I want. So let me hold it up and show you. It's close. And if you are watching SimNet Nutrition, which is my favorite cute guy on YouTube, he doesn't cook with any oil. So I'm not quite there. But as you can see, there isn't any oil pooling. And that I really like. So now the amount that I'm going to put on is going to be probably maybe another tablespoon. So the decanter that I use for doing my seasoning goes a very slow drip, very small amount at a time. When I'm doing my cooking, I go with a little bit more opening. So I've learned to use 1 second pour as my teaspoon, and you'll get to know your pouring spout. So you don't always have to go grab a teaspoon and measure. That's just not going to happen. But you also don't want to go straight from the olive oil bottle because you will always get more than you wanted. And then you've ruined your dish and ruined your waistline because you're eating way too much fat. So find a spout that you're really comfortable with so you can get just the right amount. So 1/1000. And that gave me a teaspoon. Now let me show you how that was just about right. So now I'm going to stir it in, and it's going to be just a perfect amount to let there be a good cooking level of oil, but not too much. Yeah, that's looking great. So whenever you're getting ready for your week and you're doing a little bit of meal prep, what I really encourage you to do is have a blend of veggies that you just prepare and have them in the fridge. Onions, garlic, and celery, maybe even bell pepper would be great just to get prepared. And that way you can do all of your cooking of the veggies at once, and then they're ready to go. And nothing is more fabulous, in my opinion. You come home after a long day and you've got a meal started because you've got all your key ingredients cooked and ready to go. So that's kind of my favorite. So these are almost at the point where I call them sweated, which means they're lucid. You can kind of see through them, but they're not browned. Probably the first thing I ever learned to cook was when I was studying French, and I learned to do French onion soup. Has anybody ever made that? French onion soup. And one of the key things is how to saute the onion that goes into that fantastic soup. And if you burned it, all the French people would turn up their nose. So that's looking just about right. I love it. I love it. Okay. So once I'm done with the preparation, I'm going to put it into my side dish. And then I'm going to wipe down the skillet. I could use some water, but like my mom, she would do a little bit of water and then right away with a paper towel, she would wipe it down and put it right back on we had a big pot and pan rack that she would hang it from. And again, I'm not sure if that's good because it's in the open air. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Would it cause that surfactant to break down rather than putting it away? I don't know. Just a thought. But I'm going to show these beautiful onions. I'm just going to put them in my little skillet over here. Now, like I said, I do use the skillet all the time that is not cast iron. And we have several of these in the bakery too that are not a special surface. It's just a good old-fashioned metal pan, nice and heavy. Anodized steel is really what we call it. And I really encourage you to get that style in addition to your cast iron, because you've got two different purposes for them. But of course, cast iron is always going to be a great choice. Okay, so now I want to show you one more, and this is with the little grate in there. So it's going to give us a really beautiful look and feel to the food. And again, I'm going to add a little bit of surface oil. This is the one where it had a little bit of rust. This surface is a little tougher because it has all those little holes in it. So it's going to cook very differently, and I would not recommend doing your onions and garlic in this. This has one purpose, and that is to make pretty marks. And so if you're not doing grilled burgers, you might use it for, actually, I have used it, come to think of it, for grilling butternut. It's beautiful. If you use already cooked butternut, slice it, get this nice and hot, and add your beautiful grill marks, it'll look so gourmet. But I'm just going to let that heat up, and it will be ready for my next event. I'm going to do one more. Put this one over here. Notice that when they are so heavy, I want to bring this up because I have learned some really great technique to use my utensils to help with the bottom. So watch this. I lift it now with that spoon underneath, and the wooden spoon saves me because my wrist isn't strong enough, so I can really get it from point A to point B. So it works out great. So now let me show you this one while my griller is heating up. This one has been in my husband's family for a long time. It's a Swiss, so it's one of those that does not have a surface coating, but it is the anodized steel. So it has been seasoned. I went to the little kitchen store in Bernie where he bought it, and this brand is called Swiss, and I've seen them there, and they have a little layer of pre-seasoning on it, but not nearly as dark as this. So I asked him what he used to use this for in general, and he was a king at making red beans and rice. So this was his go-to when he sauteed the peppers and onions and garlic for that particular dish. So I could tell that it was really well used. Now it does have some little pieces of food on there. So probably what I would need to do is get some steel wool and bring it all the way down to its surface and kind of bring it back up, because it's a great skillet. I love the fact that the cooking surface is very large. So if I compare it, if I want more surface area for my browning, this one is the win. The other thing that's great about both of these is they don't ever warp. Nice, solid, flat surface. Some of the cheaper, or even sometimes expensive but not good, metal pans will warp in the center, and that's an absolute deal breaker when you're trying to saute. We do have a couple of those here at Powerhouse, and I should just throw them out because they don't do a good job. So when you get one that's heavy, has a nice, heavy, thick base, that is the sign of a good skillet, and it does not always mean that it's more expensive. This one was probably the most expensive one we have. It was about $100, and again, that Swiss brand is really good, but it's not cast iron. These again were $12, 12 or maybe 18, and same with this. And so what I hope that you will do someday is share your seasoned skillet with your family. And even if you pull one out of your cabinet that you have and you bring it from the base, you have to clean it down to maybe the metal layer. with some steel wool and gradually put it back up. It won't take nearly as long as if you buy a brand new one, because every time you cook with it, it is building that beautiful layer of the oil and really adhering to the metal and creating that strong base. So I hope this helps, and I can't wait to hear what you guys do with your best tool in the kitchen, which is your skillet. So we'll see you soon.